Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin, well known to my friends as Marv, and this time I am speaking with Vuk, who you may remember in a different guise from a previous episode where I spoke to him about an earlier show that he made, The Fantastic Darwin's Deviations. And this time we're talking about well, I'll let him explain it to you because over time it's changed. It's evolved into something different. So thank you for speaking with me today, Vuk, about Tracing Owls.
Well, thank you, Marv, for having me again, despite the way that I acted in the first episode. But yeah, as you say, it's a whole growth process. And I really like the idea of you having me on for both of my shows as both of my personas. Last time we talked about Darwin's Deviations, which was, a little comedy, satirical podcast with a lot of deep thought embedded into it. But I was portraying my character who's kind of an over-exaggerated version of myself. And now the different side of the same coin, myself as myself, just ordinary Vuk from Bosnia, doing Tracing Owls, completely different take on the same topics that I was covering.
So I'm now talking to the realistic, to put it into a pop culture reference, you are now the John Cleese to previously being Basil Fawlty.
Exactly, yes. And to be very honest, my growth process through the two podcasts that I did kind of reflects my own process in coming out with all of these ideas and intricate thoughts I have about these topics, and kind of teaching myself how to talk with people, how to communicate, and how to also be more empathic and more open to other people's views on certain things, which I have grown a lot in the past year doing Tracing Owls. And kind of Tracing Owls has become something much beyond my set intentions for what I wanted for it to be. I wanted it to be like a little quirky show where I talk about paranormal topics and aliens and cryptids and whatnot. But by the end, it's like a philosophical stream of consciousness and me going on a journey to talk with various different people about various different topics.
Yep, including me surprising you with a previous episode. But
yes.
So, what was I going to say? I mean, that you've just said, it resonates because pulling the curtain away, we both discussed the fact that I went out last night to a retirement party for a great friend of mine who I used to work with. He was my boss, essentially, when I was voluntarily working for the local youth arts movement in association with the council. And so we were there, and then I reverted back to the younger me because, truth be told, I can be quite... It's weird to say, really, because we're here talking on a podcast, but in real life, I can actually be quite guarded and a bit sort of like shy and in the back, trying to almost avoid talking to people, and there's a bit of a fear there or something. And I was very much like that when I first started there in the early 90s, about 91, 92, which is... I'm giving something away here. So the name Marv comes from that because of being like that, there was the misconception that I was a bit sort of paranoid. So I became Marv because of Marvin the Paranoid Android from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
That makes sense, man.
But then it does. But then what happens there is, in a sense, because then I was involved in music and doing music and playing and because it was a recording studio where it was based. They'd got a recording studio for the youth arts that they could come into and record, like young people come and record music. And so I was involved in music and playing myself, and I found that, in a sense, I became a sort of almost like slightly different version of myself to be able to go up onto stages and perform with bands. It's like not the real me. It is me, but it's like a variation of the real me, should we say, or it was.
Yeah, but are you there using your creativity, your art, your music skills to kind of, in a different form of expression or using a different form of language, express yourself? Because if you were shy, you were not able to express yourself openly, verbally, let's say, but you can through your music and creativity by using your creative endeavor as the middleman between you and the public.
That's an interesting thought, because thinking about it, when I've been in those situations where I've been involved with music, like performing or recording, it's almost like that is a gateway to conversation, because then it makes me a lot more. I'll become more chatty then, and the real me will come out a bit more then, and that's sort of almost. It's almost like, I don't know, almost like a protective shield in a sense. That bass guitar or whatever that's there is the shield, and then that can go away once there's a comfortability, maybe.
Or it's a distraction.
Well,
It's like
yes.
I can think now of stage magicians and various different ways they distract the public. I always think of, do you know who Penn and Teller are?
Oh, absolutely. I love those guys.
You know Penn. He's the big dude, and he always has his pinky finger polished in red, and he uses that for distraction. And I always think of that like, oh, you can just wave your pinky finger and get the people to look at that and not notice what you are doing on the other side.
Yeah, yes, that's a good point.
But for the listeners, like I said, I do a podcast about the paranormal and aliens and ghosts and cryptids and whatever. You may think, like, what does this conversation now have to do with that? But it has everything to do with that. So, to introduce what my show is a more nuanced philosophical exploration of the paranormal and just general weirdness. I talk about these topics the way nobody ever wants to talk about them. Usually, when we have podcasts about the paranormal and ghosts and aliens and Bigfoot and stuff, people either talk about whether it's real or not, or want to talk about scary stories and the fear aspect. But I talk about it as more ways of expression of humanity and society, a more culturological approach, and also kind of from doing my podcast, I've noticed that the paranormal is like linguistics. It's like a language that we use to talk about certain things about ourselves in a very indirect manner.
Yeah, because I was saying before we started recording that I was taken by your chat with Jack about the, and I've thought this for a while about the fact that religion is it's another part of that, almost that thing that humanity's put there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's looked at differently because it's got a sheen of being acceptable, whereas something that's just as strange and unusual, people might call it that,
Yes.
is
So
not seen that way. But they're all just constructs to a certain depart or certain way.
So you
That
are referring to my conversation with Dr. Jack Hunter, who is
Yep,
an anthropologist who studies the connection between consciousness, ecology, and the paranormal. And
yep,
he is a religious studies professor at a university. I had him on twice. I really like his idea of how the paranormal itself is this weird thread throughout society that is wild and rogue and is not under the control of humans. but religion is kind of a domestication of the paranormal. So we domesticate the paranormal that we cannot fathom and kind of reframe it within a cosmology that we are able to dabble with and understand. So we may use it for our own purposes and benefits. And I do see religion like that. All religions, there are these commonalities between all religions. Like,
Yeah.
let's say the Noah's Ark and the Great Flood. Those are like archetypes that we see throughout many different cosmologies and religions because we are all human. We all share these ingrained symbols into our collective unconsciousness. And we pull from these symbols when creating religion, or what I'd say like fan fiction of the base archetypal Jungian reality of these symbols that we all share. And we see the same in the paranormal, only instead of gods and angels and demons, we talk about aliens and Bigfoots, but it's when you look at it, the same thing, assuming a different mask. And everybody just attributes what makes sense to them to something that is underlying, shared by all humans, that is weird and unusual and probably unfathomable to us.
Yep. And there was me thinking. I mean, back in the day, you're going to find something out about me here. Back in the day, people thought I was weird and had strange thoughts when I was assuming those sort of things or mentioning these things about religion when I did my diploma in theology. And I was saying about, that, like you said about the angels and demons, and I was sort of like comparing that to aliens and phenomena from outer space or phenomena that people believe, myths and legends. And I was sort of putting them alongside each other and saying, these are very similar to that. So it's just variations of that. And people were saying when I was doing that course that I was looking at it the wrong way. And I was thinking, well, no, I'm looking at it the way that I looked at it.
But that's not so unusual. Like, if we look at the history of ufology, there have been a lot of these incidents that, let's say, religious people perceive as religious miracles or communications with angels or divine beings. But yet, the world of ufology sees it as communication with aliens. One cool example is the miracle of Fatima in Portugal, where
Yep.
three children were communicating with what they said was the Virgin Mary, and then a huge crowd of people gathered to witness the sun dancing in the sky. And in the world of ufology, they say, oh no, this was not the Virgin Mary, this was an alien disguised as the Virgin Mary. And this was not
Yeah.
the sun, this was a UFO. I say it was neither of that. It is just people projecting their own internal biases and cosmologies onto whatever is happening. But whatever is happening is more symbolic, more archetypal, and can resonate with various different people in various different ways. Somebody who is religious can see this phenomenon as having a Christian basis, and somebody who's into sci-fi can see it as having an alien basis. Um, uh, in these circles, a lot of people know of the work of Jacques Vallée, who is a ufologist from France and also one of the pioneers of the internet. He has been studying UFOs for decades, and he wrote a monumental book that was released in 1969, Passport to Magonia, where he does comparative analysis of folklore with the UFO phenomenon. So he drew parallels between UFOs and, let's say, stories in the Bible of people encountering otherworldly beings, stories of angels and demons, and even fairy folklore from the Middle Ages.
I mean, I almost feel bad really putting it across the way that I did because it makes it sound like I'm just putting it down, but I'm not. Um,
And
like,
I
like you
want
said,
everybody to know that I'm not putting it down. So
no,
when we say that these are variations and personal interpretations of the same thing, but molded, co-created by our own biases and perceptions of the world around us and of reality and of what it is to be human and our role in the universe. I'm not saying like that's all nonsense that should be dismissed. I am of the opinion that everything is equally valid because these are various different expressions of what it is to be a human. And there is no right or wrong or black or white. I am kind of the monistic mindset that there is only one reality and we are the ones separating everything into black and white and good or bad because our minds function in that duality. We always need to side with one side and be against the other side.
Yeah, some people might look at things and they might say, there's like people when they see these creatures or whatever, and they'll say, "Oh, that's just somebody that's seen like a shadow of or something of this, and this, and it's just like the shadows have merged, and this is why they saw this shadow that looked like this sort of creature. So people believe this because of that."
Mm-hmm.
So people might just say that from one point of view, but from the point of view in another point of view, a way that I look at it as well is that there's some sort of beauty there within these mythologies or these things that people have, that we talk about. There's something lovely there in the way that, for instance, I remember years ago, this is going to sound, I'll pass you the sick bucket, I suppose. But, I was talking early in the morning with Louise and there were all these birds singing outside or whatever. And then I made up a made up conversation between them. And I was sort of saying, "Oh, morning, you've been busy yesterday." "Well, yeah, I didn't get that many worms, not as many as usual. But then later on, this, that, and the other took some to the kids." And I was making up this complete, conversation that these birds were having to make it sort of different to my bird. And I see it like that as something that sort of just, there's a beauty to it in a sense.
Yes, and even if that does not reflect the material reality of what is happening, it still is an expression of something that transcends the material reality. It is an expression of your perception and your use of creativity to form a means of communication with your own significant other and create this joke and send you guys off on your way to deal with your shitty day working and stuff like that. I think that's beautiful. And all of that was pulled from just a mundane natural occurrence you saw outside your window. So that kind of goes with the theme of my show. I mean, why is it called Tracing Owls? I had this idea that we are over exaggerating natural occurrences around us that are very mundane if you take a scientific look at them. But the beauty of it is in the over exaggerations and in the traced outlines of nature that we form. We do not analyze, the intricacy of the natural processes, but we form these outlines that are then transformed into monsters and various different beings that we can use to communicate with each other. And my logo displays a barn owl spreading its wings and casting the shadows of Mothman and the Flatwoods Monster, which are two cryptids from West Virginia that are theorized to have just been owls that people saw. But yet there's this mythology that has been present since the 50s and 60s, and people still talking about these monstrous over exaggerations of what was probably just an owl. And I think that's very beautiful. It even transcends the biological existence of the owl. It lived and died its biological life, but it still keeps living on in our storytelling.
This next one is going to sound ridiculous now because you basically explained it. So how do you choose what topics you're going to talk about? And then as a sidebar to that, how do you choose which guest to feature to discuss these topics with?
Okay, so At the start, I was much more strict with my podcast. I thought, hey, I'm going to make every episode like 10, 15, 20 minutes. I'm going to talk about a specific case and be in control of everything that I present. And I did only a few episodes of that. And then I started having guests. And then I started seeing that when you have guests and when you talk about people with people about these very vague interpretive things, and even stumble upon people who have different interpretations than you can't really be in control, you know? So the more I did my podcast, the more I realized that I am not really in control of the topics that I have. It is the guest who is in control.
Yep.
And though I can be the person who wants to have strictly, his own podcast where I'm going to share my voice and my view of everything, I don't see my podcast, the meaning of my podcast is that. My podcast is more of just a reason to sit down with somebody and have a spiritual exchange. And I can't have a spiritual exchange with somebody if I want to trap them within my own, narrative and framework. So I end up having guests who I feel I can benefit from and who I feel can benefit from me. I don't want to do, an interview where I'm just asking the mundane questions these people are always asked, and then, okay, bye bye, that's that. I want them to come out of the conversation with something new and something to ponder over. As you heard with Dr. Jack Hunter, like I got him to ponder a few times, even though he's a university professor and I'm just a nobody. But it's all in the approach you take towards podcasting. It's the intention you have of why you are asking this person to guest on and what you intend to ask them. I don't intend to ask Dr. Hunter things that he's been asked by every other paranormal podcast out there. You can go listen to all those podcasts. I intend to have a kind of stream of consciousness conversation with this person and kind of cross pollinate ideas and concepts and interpretations.
Essentially, you are having a discussion just like you would in a normal situation, just generally, as the phrase goes, chit chatting. And most of the time, with that sort of thing, with a general chat, you don't
Yes,
know where that's going to go.
I don't know where it is going to go, but I am. The thing is, when you are chit chatting, you're just having fun. You're trying to loosen up and have fun, and we refer to that as shit talking. Joking around and stuff like that. But like I do chit chatting and with the intent of opening up a stream of consciousness where maybe my guest and myself find ourselves kind of outside the confines of what we intend the conversation to be and allow it to become what it needs to be, not what we want it to be. And to do that, you need to be very mindful. You can't just say, oh, I'm just going to chit chat and wherever it leads. You need to be mindful of everything the guest says, everything that crosses your mind, your internal reaction to hearing what the guest says, and then making the decision where you're going to move on with the discussion to bring it to some place that it needs to be. So there is a lot of kind of direction. I'm a director of the conversation apart from just being the host.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's a good thing. In essence. I mean, I find it with my show that I'm opening myself up to finding out about new things and just discussing and keeping my mind open to alternatives. Essentially, that's what I'm doing with mine, and I'm guessing that you do the same to a degree with it. Well, probably to a bigger degree than I do.
Oh, yes. And maybe you know this, like when you're editing an episode. I edit where I like cut out every breath and stuff. Like I slice and dice everything because I want to create a stream of consciousness. Obviously, somebody coughs, somebody sneezes. I say a joke that does not land. I need to cut that out to not to not be a stone in the stream of consciousness where somebody will just stumble upon it and break their neck or something. So I want it to be streamlined. And when editing, I am constantly thinking about what did I just hear, what am I hearing now, and what am I going to hear, and how all of that flows together.
Yeah, I don't do anywhere near as much editing as I used to do.
And to be very frank, why I do so much editing is because, as I said, I'm Bosnian and I'm not an English speaker. So obviously, I stumble in my discussion and a lot of ums and stuff like that. But when I get to it and edit an episode, I see the editing process as kind of curating on a very mystical and magical level, kind of like alchemy. I am taking a huge chunk of a conversation and creating something more refined out of it, and enabling it to have some kind of flow state that has a hypnotic effect on people listening to it.
You're creating gold from a rock.
Yes. And I have noticed, like, however bad a discussion can get or a recording can be, with editing I can make something out of it. It's like the soul is there, the soul of the conversation, and whatever you do technically with it, you're trying to allow it to convey the soul or the spirit of the conversation. You're making it more refined.
So anyway, this is going to be interesting. So, within the space of over 140 episodes, this is a very tiny little list. So you got, what is it? You've spoken about Blabber Jabber, Tater Squitch. You're going to pick me up on some of these because some of
Yeah,
these are made up by
those are
yourself.
made up ones that I created.
The Jackalope isn't, is it?
Oh no, but it is also a made up one.
Well, yes, yeah. So I was going to carry on with the list. I mean, Sasquatch isn't, but is it?
Hmm.
So are you saying then that there's no such thing as the Humperoo?
Oh no, the Humperoo is a creation of myself and Cassie Marazon, an artist. So to go into that, like I did a mini series of 10 little episodes with an artist, Cassie Marazon, where we had the idea, let me create the name of an imaginary creature, uh, kind of in homage to the lumberjack fearsome critter folklore. I create the name and I have a concept in my head what it is, but I give her just the names and then she creates art out of them and her own story of what this thing is. And then we discuss the differences, like how she interpreted my name and what she got out of it and what was my set intention. And then I go into various different tangents with her about how we can create a whole mythology out of this creature that she just made up.
But essentially, that's what people are doing anyway. Dare I say it?
Ye- Um, well, we do it very unintentionally, and we do it as a society, not as individuals. I mean, you do have a lot of hoaxes and a lot of these tall tales, which are essentially the origin is somebody around a campfire made up a creature and told their buddies about it. But then the story spreads, and with every person that retells the story, they add something onto it, they remove something, and then just mold this creature. This creature is like a Play-Doh that is molded throughout the centuries by people's various different interpretations of it, but also by the various roles it can fulfill in their lives.
I mean, okay. So I was going to carry on with that list, and now I'm not going to bother. Let's just say I'm going to use this now. This is my expletive warning. But you talk about all sorts of fuck uppery,
Yes.
and that's one of your phrases.
Okay, so my phrase "embrace the fuck uppery" is because I have been through a journey as a guy who has a biological background and who worked as a biology teacher, and you have this feeling that you need to stick with facts, that you need to be very mindful of what you say and how you talk about these things. I've struggled a lot with how I want to do my podcast, how I want to present it, how I want to talk about these things, how much research should I do. And eventually you just realize, embrace the fuckery, because all of this is just absurd, weird nonsense that fulfills many roles for many different people. There is
Yeah.
no right or wrong. And I mean, that's what attracts me to the world of the paranormal and the strange, because as somebody from the hard sciences background, you got kind of get sick of that pressure, that societal pressure of everything has to be meticulously documented and defined within the established self-imposed system of rules within science. And science itself is just a tool. It's not reality. It's not Science is not a reflection of reality, but it is the best reflection we have and the most accurate one. But there is so much out there that science cannot explore within its methodologies, like art, for example, which like, can you think of somebody scientifically talking about the appeal of Star Wars and what attracts people to various different Star Wars media? I
Yeah.
always talk about language. Like, how can we scientifically prove language exists? Language is something that exists within an ether between people who have the established tool set in their minds to understand the symbology and the meaning of these written down letters or sounds that we make to construct words and sentences and whole stories and cultures and religions and so on. So, all of that is outside of the framework of materialistic science. There's art, there's culture, there's society. So I'm very interested in that aspect. And that's what attracts me to the paranormal, because there is much more humanities, anthropology oriented stuff there than any physical material science.
Wow. Sorry, lost for words after that. But yeah, I mean, language, the spoken word. It derives, well. There's people had to communicate with each other, and then so ways were it's yeah. Languages were made in different countries, different languages, this, that, and the other. And I've said before about, same goes with music, where instruments have been created by people all over the world, and you find similarities in those, much as there's similarities in different languages across the world. There's differences in music across the world, which is another form of communication anyway, another
Yes,
form of speaking, but through that media instead. But all of it, when you look at all these things, and the mythology, this, that, it all in essence stems from that same sort of place anyway, of people communicating these things that they see or they experience in life, and they're coming up with ways to put that across.
exactly. So I don't want to dwell too much on it, but one thing that I keep constantly bringing up on my show is this entity in Tanzania,
Yeah.
the Popobawa, which is a spirit that attacks people during sleep paralysis in their dreams, and
Yeah.
oftentimes attacks men per the folklore. But this is more modern folklore. Like, this thing started being a part of the culture in the 60s, and it was not talked about much until the 90s. Due to political turmoil and due to also Western media learning of this urban legend and then just plastering it all over the place without any cultural context of what it is. But why I'm obsessed with it, and I interviewed the linguistics professor who wrote the book on the Popobawa, is that it is a small scale example of how the paranormal is used by humans in general globally. Only this is on small scale on the island of Pemba in Zanzibar in Tanzania, and people use this demon, the spirit, to express many different things. So being gay there is illegal, and you can go to jail if you openly talk about homosexuality. So gay people would use the popobawa to communicate with each other, to recognize each other, to tell jokes. Oh, I was visited by the popobawa. Men who cheat on their wives would say, "Oh, I was possessed by the popobawa," because it's more culturally acceptable there. Women who had sexual encounters with entities or ghosts say they were attacked by the popobawa because it's a Muslim conservative country, and women do not have uh, sexual as many sexual human rights as men do. So for women to express their sexuality more openly, they need to kind of use this supernatural entity as a middleman to talk about it indirectly. And so there are many various other roles, like people who are religious figures establish how prominent of a religious figure they are by saying, "Oh, I exorcise so many popobawas out of people." So just this one little demon has so many societal roles in this culture that is rooted in the Swahili language that they speak there. It is a custom there to talk indirectly. Like, it is considered rude if you directly address anything. So you need to beat around the bush and talk in euphemisms and metaphors. And they use the supernatural a lot to talk about taboo issues, because the supernatural allows them to, in a safe way, kind of break these societal taboos without acknowledging them directly.
Much in the same way as poets like Wilfred Owen used to hide their sexual uh, alignment through poetry.
Yes.
So which is terrible. I mean, the dream thing you've mentioned that before when you had Theresa Mays on
Hmm.
as well. You
Yeah.
brought that
So
up.
so I had Teresa to talk about her experiences uh, as a person who has lucid dreams, because she has perfected her practice of taking control of her dream and using it for creativity and learning. And that was a very monumental episode for me, because like we sat down with the intention to talk about dreams and went into this whole discussion about Gaianism versus animism.
Yep.
Gaianism is the belief that we are all a part of an overarching entity, just like cells in the body. Only we are the cells of something greater, which is, Mother Earth or the planet as a whole. While animism is, the belief that everything out there, including even trees and rocks and the sun and planets, all have personhood and are alive and have a soul or a spirit. So these are kind of superficially two mutually exclusive ways of thinking, but not necessarily, because they can go hand in hand. And I was baffled by just learning why she is more attracted to the idea of animism rather than Gaianism as a woman. Because however much I want to, as a cis white male, think that I understand and have female guests on the show to explore these topics and to give them a voice to talk about these topics, there are still things that, because of my gender and my sex, I can't understand. Societal pressures which lead people to uh, gravitate towards a certain way of thinking about the world, which is equally as valid, because it fulfills the role in their life of, oh, this is my place in the universe.
Yet another human construct there. This is what a female is like. This is what a male is like, and
Hmm.
and
Exactly.
thankfully nowadays all of that's being thrown out of the way. People are who they are. They are not determined by the gender or anything like that. They are those people, and
and
it
and to be very frank, like, it's people are not determined by their gender, but rather of society's treatment of their gender.
yeah,
Like, when you go into these topics, you realize just how much our ecology, and not just the natural ecology, but social ecology affects us and molds us into individuals, and why we have all of these biases, why somebody gravitates towards angels and another person would gravitate towards aliens. It's just two different sides of the same coin and two different expressions of what it is to be a human that are the result of growing up in two various different social and historical contexts.
Absolutely. Definitely. So, I mean, this next bit I'm going to do twofold as well. I mean, I feel bad now because you were talking about, the question answer thing, and here I am doing question answer thing. But it's all part of how the show works to a degree. But like we were saying beforehand, I have this sort of like thing that I follow, but I find the most interesting part of this show is when we go away from this, and so I think you've noticed it where people will suddenly guest will mention things in my show, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave the structure of the show alone for a while I try and delve into that they brought up and try and find out what it is that makes these people tick.
I mean, isn't that just the most base reason why you even do your podcast? You always talk about how you're interested in why people, what people can use podcasts for, why they want to talk, why they want to express their opinions, various different types of digital media which allow us the capabilities to be heard and share our voices. So I don't find it at all surprising that you would eventually realize that adhering to a structure does not work when talking about such topics, because these topics are very liberating and they go against any form of structure.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, I realized that pretty quickly when having guests on, when realizing what I assumed about the topic or the guest is completely wrong. When realizing that the guest bringing up a tangent can lead to a much better episode than anything I could have thought of myself. So over time, I just realized I'm going to sit down and talk with people. I mean, I have a vague idea and understanding what I intend to talk about, but very often that just does not happen. And it leads to a much better episode. I've learned that the podcasts that I do, both of them, become entities for themselves, and I'm just some kind of curator or something. But they get a life of their own, and it's just like this whole flower unraveling beyond my control.
Yeah, essentially, you are the conduit through which something comes out that until it emerges, you don't actually know what it is that's going to emerge.
Exactly, and that's why I like to talk about the idea, especially with Todd Purse, my closest collaborator the
I
past
love
year.
Todd.
Yeah, and who you had on your show with an amazing episode. I like to talk with him about channeling creativity, especially because he is an artist, and he, as an artist of the weird, knows very well that very often he will, intend his art to look a certain way, but in the end, it comes out completely different, and he has no idea where it came from.
Absolutely. What sort of research do you do up to it? Because I mean, I find it fascinating. For instance, I mean, this is why I've put this one in my notes. Is the way that I've worded it, developing and choosing your library, because you have a fascinating library of books, physically and digitally, that it's almost like it's probably not real, but I have this imagined, perceived, or this perception of you just being there, stuck in your books, constantly looking and going, oh, and finding new things to get your creativity flowing.
Okay, so I love that question. I saw it in the papers that you sent me, and I was just
Yep.
waiting for that because maybe I will disappoint you or something. But I love how you say it is my vision of you. I
Okay.
find that beautiful. It is also my vision of what the perfect me would be. But in reality, I don't read a lot at all.
Okay.
And I do have some physical books, but because I live in Bosnia, like it would cost me a fortune to get physical books from America and stuff like that. So I have a lot of digital books. I've learned through this process that the best source of information are people, not
Yep.
books. And this is coming from a former biology teacher. And even as a teacher, I was teaching my students the smartest person is not the person who has the most knowledge in their head, but the person who knows where to look for that knowledge. So the person who knows their sources of information or who they can ask for information. So I don't rely on books as much as I rely on people, because books are kind of a more academic way of expressing facts and this and that. But when you sit down and talk with somebody about the same thing that they wrote in the book, you get these little tidbits that point towards their own perceptions and biases on what they wrote. And that gives you a more full picture of where this person is coming from. And not just, the person, but society as a whole, because I see all of us as extensions of an overarching whole. We are all just individual expressions of an overarching humanity.
Okay. We are going to go down a path now that I'm intrigued by, and I'll just preface this with I'll just say that if you want this bit taken out, we're just going down a path here that I'm
Oh,
intrigued by.
leave
Okay.
everything in, man.
Okay.
I
So
had I had like on my show experiencers of high strangeness and alien abductions and stuff, and like I have a 3 hour unedited episode with one of them. Everything we went through is just in there, and I didn't want to touch it at all.
okay, because as opposed to going into the strange and weird and the paranormal and UFOs and that, I'm going into psychology here
Hmm.
essentially. So I see it as a constant evolution in a sense where, so if we're pulling away the curtain, so you used to teach biology at school, and there was a certain thing about that where it was almost like the humdrum of this is how you have to teach this, that, and the other, and you
Yeah.
had to follow a specific rigid thing, and that could be stifling in a way, and you wanted to almost like pull out of that. And from the experience of being in these schools teaching, and you changing your teaching method to make it more interesting to kids or to those people you were teaching, it evolved, and that's how Darwin's deviations came about. Essentially, I mean,
Yeah.
there's more to it than that, but and then you did the Darwin's deviations, and then when you got, I'm guessing, towards the end of Darwin's deviations, you were then already evolving and wanting something a bit different from there, and that's how you evolved in how you have
Hmm.
developed tracing owls. And then over the period of tracing owls, over that time, you can see a development there where, like you said, it started at this era where essentially at the beginning of tracing owls, there was sort of a similarity to Darwin's deviations in a way where it's basically talking about these things and giving the information in a sense, but without the Monty Python esque
Yeah.
aspects of Darwin's deviations, which I always loved. But and then it's evolved into that, and it shows you. In essence, you can see how you as a person internally have changed through that transition or those transitions in those different periods in those shows and in your life that way.
Yeah. So, oh man, there's a lot to unpack there.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I had to
So,
go there.
I mean, for the people who did not listen to my prior interview, and I'd rather they don't because I was such an asshole to you, because I was playing a character. But yeah, my first show, Darwin's Deviations, is like South Park meets Magic School Bus. Like,
Yep.
you said now, oh, my teaching methods led to Darwin's deviations. They did, but that's just an underlying subtle thread.
Yeah.
Superficially, Darwin's deviations is, a lot of toilet humor and making fun about animals and stuff like that. But I insert a lot of philosophy under this dark, seedy underbelly of fart jokes, I did that very intently. I wanted to make an anti podcast because I was so sick and tired of listening to podcasts where people go into podcasting trying to already from the get go establish a show that they can make marketable, that they can eventually make money off of and get popular and whatnot. And I want none of that. I just wanted to do whatever I want to do and not worry about that stuff. So I made it very obvious from the get go that I am never going to be monetized or marketable in any way. And if anybody thinks that I can, I'm just going to do stuff intentionally that makes that impossible. Now, the old podcast, I don't know how aware you are of this, but it led to me having prophetic dreams that led to an actual death in my family.
Yeah.
And the more I ponder about that, the more I realize what I was doing with Darwin's deviations is sort of a hyper sigil kind of thing. I don't know how much you are aware of that, but it's essentially chaos magic. It's a creative imbuing, incorporating themselves within a narrative of their creative work and seeing weird stuff happen in their life as their fictional character is going through weird things in the narrative.
We,
There are a lot of comic book artists who had this happen to them.
Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah. So that was a very weird experience. That's the sole reason I stopped doing Darwin's Deviations, because it spooked me. I feel it's a very cursed show now. It has a lot of these things happening throughout the episodes that later happened in my real life. I played with dreams in the episodes. I ended up having weird dreams, and then I ended up having prophetic dreams, which I still sometimes do. And I've had them all my life, but I don't attribute anything paranormal to that. I just think that it is maybe intuition or something like that. But you get yourself into this creative state where you're playing with tens of characters, you are voicing yourself who are manifestations of different parts of your own psyche. And you start thinking like them, and you start seeing reflections of your real life in what you are doing with them in the show. And it gets very freaky.
Absolutely. I'm glad I went down that line now, but I had to go there because I was just found myself
Yes.
intrigued by that.
Well, I mean, it's very apparent that from the first day I started podcasting, I have not been making normal podcasts at all. I have been doing something very hyper sigil, like incorporating myself very subtly into these shows in a way that it impacts my life and even people who listen to my show and get inspired. So I kind of continued that with Tracing Owls because I wanted to do a proper podcast, and nothing was working. And the moment I stopped thinking of what I want and started allowing this other show to become an entity for itself, and unpacking it at its own pace, and just off a whim and off of gut instincts, getting guests on and talking about certain topics without any kind of plan, I made some of the best content I'll ever make in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize for the laugh there.
Oh no,
That was me. No,
this is very funny. Like another thing about the paranormal that attracts me is the absurdity of it. Things
yeah,
happen in such absurd ways that you're left to just laugh at yourself and know that nobody will ever believe you because it's so stupid. This is why I like hoaxers, and in the paranormal field, people hate hoaxing because, oh, how dare somebody, hoax a Bigfoot and then ruin the credibility of our field where we want Bigfoot to be real. And I see that as I see hoaxing as a creative expression. There's in Cornwall in the UK
Yep.
this self-proclaimed magician who is also a psychedelic artist who is named Doc Shields,
Yep.
and he has been trying to conjure the Loch Ness monster for decades. Before, like he's very old now, and he took one of the most famous Nessie photos. It's the one with the blue water with its head sticking out and Nessie smiling. The Shields
Yep.
photo. He claims that he was hoaxing photos of Nessie, and then actual Nessie appeared. And of course, nobody believes him. Of course, he is known as a liar and a hoaxer, but yet the guy believes that this happened. And you can't help but wonder that these things happen in such absurd fashion that you are left with a weird occurrence and a story, but nobody will ever believe you. And there are a lot of stories like that. There was Joe Simonton in the 60s in Wisconsin, a chicken farmer. He saw a UFO outside of his house and went to it and saw Italian-like aliens cooking pancakes. They gave him an empty jug so he could fill it with water. He gave them the water, and they gave him 3 pancakes. And the guy
Yep.
was left with physical pancakes that were examined by the U.S. military. But nobody believes him, and he became a laughingstock because of that.
You see, you mentioned that Loch Ness monster there, and I'm about to say something. I'm going to probably get some emails from people here. Podslikers@gmail.com if you want to send any. But the Loch Ness monster thing. Why would that be such a strange and, to some people, impossibility? When you think about the history of animals, why would I mean, not calling it the Loch Ness monster? Why would that almost dinosaur style creature underwater not exist?
Well, I mean, even in its dinosaur interpretation, it's very silly. So it's supposed to be a
Yeah.
plesiosaur, which is not even a dinosaur. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, plesiosaurs did not have their necks bent that way, like a
Okay.
horse, like we see with the Loch Ness monster. So even when people say they see the plesiosaur-like interpretation of the Loch Ness monster, it still does not have biological credibility to it because it does not match what plesiosaurs actually were. Their necks went straight forward, and they could just move it left or right, not upwards. And then there are these theories, oh, maybe it's a ghost of a plesiosaur or something like that. I see it as a symbol. I see it as a living symbol that fulfills many different roles for many different people.
I'm glad we're not doing video. I've just gone red face now because of that.
Oh, no worries. I mean,
You're wrong, Marv.
that's what keeps the legend alive. Like, people love dinosaurs. People love the idea that dinosaurs could be alive today, and that just keeps this myth alive. It's beautiful, even though it's not accurate to what nature truly is. But we're not talking about natural things. We're not
No.
talking about a natural creature. Maybe it's a sturgeon, that people are seeing. But we are talking
Bloody big
about a symbol,
sturgeon.
a meme.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's just so. I'm going to have to right turn it around, Martin. So, I mean, you've already mentioned some of the standout moments that you've had in the show. So I'm trying to recatch myself now while I divert.
Okay, while you recatch, I want to talk about Bigfoot a bit because this is
Okay.
something that I felt I wanted to share on a podcast. And
Okay.
when we're talking about memes and symbols, like think about it. You look at the silhouette of a Bigfoot from the Patterson-Gimlin footage, and though you're not from this field, and you probably don't know anything about Bigfoot, you see that and you know it's a Bigfoot. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
And you show a child that silhouette of Bigfoot, walking in on the side. And the child also knows it's a Bigfoot, but the child does not know anything about the history of the cases and the Patterson Gimlin footage and whatever. So obviously it's a meme, it's a symbol that exists in the pop culture now. And I like to think of Bigfoot not as a flesh and blood creature out there, but as a symbol that we invoke in certain circumstances when we need that symbol invoked to show us something. I have a friend who had a Bigfoot experience, and we were talking about this a few weeks back. He does not believe technically that it was purely physical. He thinks maybe it was a bit spiritual, even. And we went into this whole discussion of how he grew up in West Virginia and how this sighting of the Bigfoot coincided with the worst period of his life when West Virginia was in economic depression. And if you look at folklore and history, a lot of cultures have had wild men stories, not necessarily Bigfoot and not necessarily American. All across the world, people have seen wild men in the forests and been amazed by it. And I can't help but think maybe Bigfoot is kind of a symbol of our needs to break away from the contemporary society we are in. Like economic depression in West Virginia, you need to go to work to make money so you can barely survive and live this miserable existence. But then something happens that invokes the symbol of Bigfoot in the forest that symbolizes to you this desire to just let it all go and take your clothes off and go live in the wilds, completely rogue and free from the capitalistic system that's slowly draining away at your life. And it is just miraculous when you think about it that way. And when you think of all the people, especially in rural areas around America, who claim to have seen Bigfoot, who live in these kinds of, societal and cultural circumstances, just what this can symbolize to them. And it's not important whether this thing is real or not, or whether it's a bear that they mistook for Bigfoot, but rather how it affects them, how it propels them down the line to change.
But Bigfoot, that brings, that brings up something else where it's another one of those cases where you've got Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, abominable snowman. The list goes on where there's variations of a similar thing
Mm-hmm.
all over the world, but called different things, and they're almost same versions of things, which is, that's something that intrigues me as well. Another case where that happens.
I mean, even there are people who say that there's a Bigfoot in the UK, even though the UK does not have the ecological factors that are necessary for Bigfoot to even survive as a creature. But that's what points towards it being something cultural, not biological. Like, think about it. What is more believable? That there are 50 different species of hairy ape men all around the world, yet we have never found any single one of them. Or that there is something ingrained into the minds of all humans on Earth, just as pyramids or just as various different instruments, as you said, that express themselves in various different ways depending on the culture where they're expressed.
Yeah. Just don't go chasing after families named Henderson to try and find the real one. Okay.
And that's also a whole topic in itself, how Harry and the Hendersons kind of revitalize interest into Bigfoot. And a lot of people I have talked to about Bigfoot on the show say how that movie, is a childhood staple for them, or Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And speaking of that, the ending scene where they're using music to communicate with the aliens.
Yep.
So, if something is an alien from another planet where even like gravity is completely different than here, and all of these other factors which lead to the evolution of life. You have to think, like, if an alien comes to Earth and we show it music, we play music for it, can it even hear our music or perceive it? Because its auditory organs are adapted to something completely different than what we have here on Earth. you know so maybe we can't communicate with real aliens via music, but there's this idea from that movie that resonates with people, because the aliens we are talking about are not aliens but are us. They even look like us. They are projections of what we could be somewhere out there if we are more technologically advanced, and what would unify us all together. And it's just the story of what unifies people. It's about people communicating with other people through music,
Yeah.
but labeling it as aliens so it's more acceptable and interesting.
Yeah, but there's a history of science fiction being used to communicate different things anyway, such as problems in the world, etc.
Well, yeah,
Star Trek.
it's like depending on, it's like various different flavors of ice cream. People want their narrative settings. Somebody is into fantasy, somebody is into horror, somebody's into sci-fi, and yet all of these different settings are playing with the same symbols and archetypes and meanings and expressions about humanity, but in various different flavors and masks that make it, I don't know, they make it more palatable to the person who is interested in that setting.
Yeah, I mean, other beings potentially communicating via music is along similar lines to you've got ancient civilizations who communicated through pictures using, and they were basically a word form in a pictorial form,
Hmm.
which developed into, and then you got something similar with Chinese and Japanese with their writings is very much similar to, like, Sanskrit and variations thereof. So, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that people would use music, but you're right. If people came from, this is conjecture here, of course,
Hmm.
but if people came from another planet, you're right. So the inherent differences in their atmosphere and how that planet is, how far it is away from a sun, would change how that planet is as a place to live on. And then if people or any beings lived on that planet, their whole physical self and internal and everything would be different to how it is here. That that is just a thing that conjecturally would be so that they would understand differently, they communicate differently, and everything would be different in so many ways because of the circumstances of how they would be, like I said, where they are in connection to in the universe.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, throughout history, various cultures communicated with music because people did not understand each other's languages, but music is kind of universal. So it was another form of communication to bypass the limitations of the intricacies of their languages. And there was always this motif of communicating with the other. And back in those days, the other was another tribe or another culture, or another race. But now that we are more globalized, we still have this even biologically inclined need to perceive something as an other. And when we are no longer perceiving other people as an other, because we are all in constant communication nowadays, and we all see each other as each other, we project this desire for another up into the stars. We have this need to play music for another, but we no longer have another on our planet because we are familiar with ourselves.
I do like this evolved Voog, I will say. But I mean, the episodes of Tracing Elves that I've listened to, I mean, the little bit of a laugh earlier on was you saying, about, comparing it to, you wanted to do a show that was a bit more podcasty, like other podcasts, this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And the giggle there was the fact that it sort of is, but it isn't, because inherently, with it being you, there's a certain flavour to the show that gives it that difference. It's along lines where, I'm getting all, into the weeds here and that, but it's like I've said to people before about shows where when you've got podcasts that are listened by so many people, there's a certain thing about the commerciality of that you lose the when you're listening to it. It's like it's background in essence, and it's just
Yeah,
going on in
you
the
lose the
background.
personal engagement with it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I've said that it's the shows that, I mean, essentially, if the shows that are more interesting, the ones where you've got personality there and someone that is different, or there's a certain thing about the show that has that niche to it that grabs people in. And
But
I've said, I
you
think
know
I
what
think
else
those
it
shows are
is?
more interesting to people.
You know what else it is, and I've learned this as a teacher. You need to challenge people and burst their bubble,
Yep,
for them to even notice what you're saying and then listen in and then ponder over what you're saying. Because let's say if you tell somebody something that they don't like to hear, they're
yep,
going to listen to what you have to say so they can prepare a counter argument.
yep,
And I know my show may be very off putting to mass audiences because it is very telling you stuff that you don't want to hear but maybe need to hear, or
yep,
bursting your bubble, or talking about things the way that you don't necessarily expect.
yep,
I talk about UFOs, but I don't talk about UFOs as being aliens. I talk about them as being symbols in the sky that we react to, so we may be changed, so we may think about our role in nature and the cosmos and stuff like that. People would rather it just be aliens because that's cool, and they want.
yep,
Throughout history, there's this motif of salvation. We see it in religion. Christ will come back and descend from the skies and save us all from ourselves. And that's kind of what we're doing now with aliens as well. People want that. They don't want to think about the implications on them, on their society, on their culture, and what their love for the idea of an alien can tell about what they're not acknowledging about themselves. So, I mean, my show is not huge. I have a much bigger following than I ever anticipated, but it's the following that needs to be there. Like
yep.
people who are not supposed to listen to my show won't listen to it. The ones who do are the ones that make it worth creating, because these are people with whom my words resonate with.
Yep. But then we're going in. But I'm picking up on something there again, and I'm going back into it again. The religion thing. I mean, that's why I'm attracted to the science fiction element, is because it reminds me of the Star Trek thing where they used to call them space aliens essentially, and they were saying that gods were perceived this way on planets like this, where in essence it was aliens coming to that planet and essentially making themselves seem like gods in a way. And I don't know why I've come into that. I mean,
Well,
damn well
I
that I'm a
definitely
big
know.
science fiction person.
I definitely know why you came into that, and it's something that I hear a lot talking with people on these topics. This We are all weirdos. Like
Yep,
if we're talking about this stuff, and even sci-fi, we're weirdos and we're nerds and geeks.
yep,
We do not have a um, very happy childhoods, and we always felt like an other. So We relate more with the idea of an alien because the alien is an other that is out there and much more powerful than us puny humans and our own ideas of what gods are and stuff like that. So I do understand that, and that's something we see in the paranormal world. Even when you take these old timey authors and analyze their books and read just the way they perceive these things. So I did an episode with Fred Anderson, who is a Swedish TV producer of a very popular Scandinavian ghost hunting show. And I had him on my show because we were going to discuss a book that was written by a ufologist named Gray Barker in the 50s.
Yep.
They knew too much about flying saucers. And Gray Barker was a closeted gay man in West Virginia back in the day, and he died of AIDS in the 80s. He never came out of the closet. So this was kind of a secret that his circle of friends knew about, but the public was not aware of, especially the ufology circle. And when you analyze his writing in the book, you see a lot of these motifs of him perceiving himself as an other, especially when writing about the Flatwoods Monster, and kind of comparing himself to the monster. You get this feeling that he saw himself as the monster. And throughout the course of my show, I've kind of realized because the Flatwoods Monster, if you look at pictures of it, it's very campy and kooky. It was a creature in the 50s seen by a group of kids after a meteor fell in a forest. And it had a spade like head, and it was 10 feet tall, and it had a dress, a green dress. And it's
Right.
very androgynous, you know. I have this theory that maybe the Flatwoods Monster is kind of a gay empowerment symbol or a drag queen, you know, a sci fi drag queen, because the way people got into the paranormal around our generations, they were exposed to the story of this monster and saw what this monster looked like and thought, wow, what is this freaky thing? An other, just like me, I'm the other. And an empowering 10-foot tall symbol of otherness that it's okay to be weird. Funnily enough, you know, Christina, the Crescent here, I had an episode with her
Yep.
where she talks just about that. The first time she ever started thinking about these weird things was when she saw a picture of the Flatwoods Monster on the back of a weekly world news. And that changed her life forever.
So I'm looking up that episode now for my notes on that episode that you did with Fred, because that's one that I listened to and took extensive notes of, and now
Yeah.
I'm going back well into. Because for anyone interested, that was 19th of December 2022 that was released, and I apparently listened to it on the 7th of February. Took me a while, didn't it?
I had another episode with Fred where he talks about high strangeness in Sweden. And in both those episodes, like he is a TV producer and talks about, you know, ghosts with people. So they go out to film an episode at a haunted location and talk with the people there. On camera, people talk about ghosts, but when the cameras are turned off, they then say, "Oh, I saw a troll or a gnome," and then they go into, "Oh, I saw lights in the sky," and so on and so on. Like the ghost in this case, and I mean it's tied to the Swedish culture, but the ghost is more acceptable as a supernatural thing than aliens or gnomes and trolls and, you know, high strangeness. So it's like the ghost is a linguistic gateway to allow people to test the waters. And if they establish, aha, it's safe to talk about this stuff, then they move on from ghosts to more weird things that they experienced. And by the end, you learn like they could care less about the ghosts because there's much more weirdness to it.
Yep. Thank you for giving me some time there. Yep, what is it I wrote? Vuk is joined by paranormal TV producer Fred Anderson. That should be two S's, Marv, not one. to talk about the writings of Arthur Gray Barker and how it was used to express himself as a gay man, as you said, who never came out. The documentary about him called Shades of Grey, and you mentioned the film Green Book.
It reminded me of Green Book. Did you watch Green Book, the
No, I've
movie?
not seen Green Book yet. No.
In Green Book, so there's this black jazz musician that's paying his friend to um, drive him through a tour of performances through the South, where everybody is racist. So it deals a lot with racism and stuff like that. But in the movie, you realize this character is also closeted and gay, and he gets jailed because of that. So the whole discussion we had reminded me of this because Gray Barker alludes in his book about being out on a highway, looking up at the stars for UFOs and whatnot, and then getting arrested for that, and then sent to a psychologist. And I can't help but wonder, maybe somebody caught him, because I think there that it is documented that he was arrested for being found with a man. But the way he expresses this in the 50s in a very conservative culture is by writing in his book about how he was out looking for UFOs.
But I mean, you mentioned in the episode about. I mean, it brought to mind in the episode where you were discussing that about the police potentially catching him. You mentioned in passing about this awful thing where there is this thing with entrapment for people to try and catch them out, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. And what one phrase that you came out with that I highlighted in my notes, because I thought it was absolutely perfect, was and here's the quote from you, which was, "What type of world do we live in where it is easier to talk about aliens than it is to talk about homosexuality?"
Yeah, exactly.
And that jumped out at me, and I thought you were so right with that. There's something so wrong about that.
And I mean, that's the story of ufology the last 70 years or so. We keep talking about UFOs and aliens, but are just using it to talk about different things that we don't want to acknowledge about ourselves. I mean, the UAP nonsense now going on in America since 2017, and even a few days ago there was a UFO congressional hearing. I see that as kind of us using UFOs to indirectly talk about these political issues that we're facing the last decade.
But I mean, the fact is that your show covers such a wealth of. I mean, from the outside, before people go into it, your show could look one way, but that's the people that aren't opening their minds to it. Whereas there's so much in there, so you'll go from something like that, which touches on one thing that is so poignant, and then you'll go to that incredible discussion group that you had with Jonathan Easton and Todd about AI, which I mean catches me because I had a fantastic chat about it with people the other day myself.
And I love how that episode kind of influenced you to do your own roundtable about AI.
Yes, it did, I suppose, because it's been on my mind ever since that round table that you did. It's been in the back of my mind anyway, and I've been trying to push that anyway because I've been discussing it with Todd, and unfortunately, Todd wasn't available when I recorded that episode because Todd was supposed to be one of the. In essence, I was hoping for Todd to be a co-host in a sense,
Yeah, yeah.
if I'm being honest, but that never came to be. But there's something about that, and so you touch on these important subjects. That's where I'm going to with that. But I will say that much like that conversation that you had there as the round table, the one that I did the other day on that subject, all the points that I'd put on my notes were thrown by the wayside, and it became it became a completely different beast of a show,
Yeah,
which was more interesting in a sense.
exactly, man. I just find it fascinating how I mean, I know a lot of people make podcasts so they can hang out with friends and have these discussions, as we said, shit talk, and maybe make money in the process, and create a business. But like, this is a tool, podcasting is a tool that allows us to do so much more with it.
Yep.
Like, I never would have uh, even gone into discussions about these intricate things and kind of opened up my mind to these philosophical thoughts if not for podcasting. And I'm just a dude in Bosnia, which is a war torn country, you know.
Yep.
Who the heck in Bosnia gets the capability, the chance to talk about these things with university professors in Britain and the US? So it's just miraculous what podcasting allows us, but sadly, not many people utilize the capabilities of this medium because of the initial feeling that they need to go to it with the intent of eventually being marketable or popular or successful. I don't like the word successful or
Yep.
success because I see the derailment of the conversation into something completely different and unplanned as success, as something that needs to be, not something I want, but something that needed to be. And there is no other option. There's no parallel universe where I made the perfect episode per my intention of what it should be. There's only the now, and there is only what we created as two people sharing a spiritual exchange.
Well, if I wanted to make a show that was, as another way to put it, sellable, if I wanted to do a show like that and make my show that, I wouldn't have the long form. It would basically be somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes long. Give you the everything, like, give you the basics. Basically, well, this is what the show's about. Chat with the people and get the basics. Like, how do you do the show? What's the show about? How often does it go out? What about your logo? What about your music? Cue the music for the end. Job done. Because that would grab the audience because it's quick. Because people, the general populace.
Okay, but let me ask
Yeah.
you. So, if you were to do a podcast like that, why are you doing it? Why are you taking a moment from your very busy, hard life to sit down with a stranger and create this?
You see, I find this more interesting, the long form, because it's a discussion and getting into the subject. So, in essence, we're catching those little bits of people across the world, because you've got to remember that podcast is international. It's not the
Yes.
local radio station or even the BBC or this, that, and the other. It's none of that. It's catching people across the world. So you'll get
I
a
see
few
it as
people in this
catching
country.
butterflies in a net.
Yeah, but on a worldwide thing. So if you were only available to the local radio station and you only got 2 listeners in that radio station in that region, which you might get with a podcast, if you're only getting 1 or 2 people with that, they'd fire you in a radio station because it's non-commercial.
But that's why podcasts are such a big thing now, because it bypasses the need for people to be marketable and
Yes.
to have a boss who will tell them how they should produce content. But if we have the capability to liberate ourselves from that confine, why do we still self-impose these rules back onto ourselves?
I mean, I was getting to the point that I could do it that way, the really quick short
Yeah.
form basics, this, that, and the other. But I do the long conversation because I think inherently, I think I'd find that boring to do that short. Like this, done. And I've used it as a way. I think this show essentially, I've evolved around my show in a way where I've opened up. So this is where I was getting to. I've opened myself up to listening to other things outside of because that's the thing where some people will go to shows about what they're comfortable with. And that's the thing where, to me, I see podcast as a way of developing yourself and opening your mind up to newer things and changing not necessarily who you are as a person in a certain way, but you're making yourself more knowledgeable to a degree or more open to listening to other things and to developing that more, which is what my show inherently is about, or it's grown to be. It's that it's me, in a sense, being very selfish and wanting to know what it is about them and what they are interested in and what I can gain from their interest and get from them.
Marv, like, how long have we known each other online? Like 3 years now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And it is now that I realize for the first time what the commonality is between myself and you.
Okay.
Because I approach the paranormal the same way. I listen to people talk about the weird because I see talking about the weird as a way of expressing things about themselves and about society as a whole. And you're kind of approaching the same way podcasting. You allow people to talk about their podcasts, but via the way they talk about their shows, you learn a lot about themselves, more than you'd learn about their show.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's just our, and we are kind of selfish in that we both want to learn how people tick because we had these difficult childhoods where we felt like an other, and we want
Yeah.
to connect with people. And the only way we can connect is by trying to understand what makes people connect.
Taking that to the next level now, or carrying that on, essentially, you are right. So, childhood was not easy. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. So, in a way, I looked for escapism in media.
Yeah.
So I would watch the science fiction. I'd watch the Star Treks. I'd watch, I'm older than you, so I've got the Battlestar Galacticas, the Buck Rogers, and it's escapism to escape the harsh reality of what was going on around in a broken, in a divorced family with children who are split from each other. One lives with one parent, two live with one
Yeah.
parent. I lived with another. And then those parents get married to other people, and there's difficulties that come from there, and then sexually abused at school and things like that. And you use these things, and I mean that's why I came up with stories as a kid. And I lived in when I was playing out on playgrounds, I'd be developing an unreal character to hide that there, and it's almost using media. This with podcast is almost like using media to try and discover who I am. In essence, I'm almost doing the same thing as I used media back then with television and film. I'm almost using it in the same way, really, to develop who I am, really.
And you can cut this if you're uncomfortable, but like back then, you said you were using media to convey a different you, um, who is still you, but something other. Is this like a way of creating a proxy? Like if people want to criticize or hurt you, they're not hurting you directly, but hurting the fake persona you're creating.
I think that might have been more possible towards the beginning, if we're being
Hmm.
honest.
And
It's much like you were saying. I feel I've actually felt that this year, since probably around March, maybe April, this show it moved, and I changed in a sense as well. Looking back on it, I can see how it's more me now as opposed to. I mean, it was always the long form show, but there was almost like a Marv. And the thing is, I've grown to like that name now, so I'm stuck with it. But
but you see, like
you know,
we started with you talking about the evolution of my show, and the evolution of myself. But like what you see in my show, you're projecting from yourself. We're also talking about the evolution of you. When you say like maybe that was the reason in early childhood and then you changed, you creating this fake persona via media gave you a tool set to interact with the world in a very creative, very different way than other people. And that evolved, and that led you to become a musician and an artist. And now led us to discussing this right now. So it's very wonderful how just and in the world of the paranormal, a lot of people go into the paranormal due to trauma. As we said, you and I before recording, a lot of people in the paranormal have religious trauma.
Yep.
And because people are brought up in strict religious households, they have been molded in very critical periods of their lives, early childhood, where when your nervous system is forming, you're formed already as a person with that something religious that non-religious people like myself don't have and can't understand. And when you liberate yourself from the oppressive religion that you grew up in, you still have that something. And a lot of people go into the cryptid and paranormal and UFO worlds to fill out that something in a very safe
Yep.
way, because it is not eternal damnation and abuse like with religion, but it's, as you say, escapism with aliens in outer space.
But I mean, it has helped me a lot to be able to, there's that phrase in the coming out of the shell.
Yeah.
But it's helped in a lot of ways there, because I find now when I'm at work and I'll talk to colleagues at work, or I'll talk to friends or to family, I find that it's easier to talk to people, because it'll probably start with a thing like, oh, on a podcast the other day, I heard this. And a lot of the time, I'll be honest, that comes from from Aaron Mankey and his shows, because he'll always
Mm.
come out with something on his shows, and I'll be like, whoa, that is so cool. And I never knew that. And it has actually helped me to become, I think, easier a person to talk about, because or to talk with or speak with people, says me, messing my words up. And but because, like we were saying before we started, I'm in a certain situation, in a party situation or situation with loads of people, I find myself very internal, and I'll go and hide away from it all. So when I went to the party last night, when it went down and there weren't so many people there, I found myself being a bit more open to conversation then, because it's almost like, oh God, there's so many people there. Where does little Marv fit among this big crowd? And I don't know. This is becoming very, very therapeutic. Thank you.
No problem, man. I am very glad that we went into that, and I know when we stop recording, you're gonna ponder: Am I gonna cut this out or keep it in?
I'm not pondering that at all.
That's good, man. I mean, we are talking about the same things in different languages. You talk about sci-fi and movies and media. I talk about weird shit and aliens abducting people and stuff like that. But they're two different languages to express the same turmoils of being a human in today's society. And I mean, that's been the story of humanity from its inception. We've always had storytelling, media, and these stories have always been about weird things that we use to kind of circumvent talking directly about our problems. As you wanted to go into like mythology, Greek mythology.
Yep, I'm a lover of the Ray Harryhausen films.
Oh yes. Funnily enough, I can't remember now what I had a cool thought related to that, but I can't remember.
Okay, I wish I didn't have 20 minutes left on my Zencaster time. We could talk for much longer than this otherwise. Because of the time, I mean, I'd much rather talk for much longer about that. I'll be honest. They are the magic moments that I like in the show, as opposed to the bullet points. The bullet points are the I've got to hit those, whereas the general conversation and tangents we go off on are the, dare I say, the interesting.
And I love how an episode about me turned into an episode about you. I love turning the
How
tables on
dare you
people.
do that again? Yep. For anybody listening, this is that just then is a very good display of what happens in Vuk's show, where you'll expect it to go one way, and then it goes somewhere where you never really thought it was going to go.
Oh yeah, and that's what I say. Like if I'm gonna have a guest, I want it to be somebody who would be open to this type of discussion and who will leave the discussion a changed person. Of course, I'm the one learning, but I want to kind of leave them with a gift, a portion of myself that they can spread around, ponder over and digest and spread around and talk to their friends about an idea that I put into their minds. A bit selfish, but it's like a spiritual shamanic exchange between people.
Yeah, I think I should retitle this "Tracing Owls Meets Pods Like Us," because you've turned this show around on its head.
Oh man, I love that.
So, how is the show recorded then? Is it recorded much the same way as we do now when you have the chats? Do you like get on a Zoom call or something similar to that, or Zencaster?
Mostly Zencaster when it was free. I haven't done any episodes for months, so I don't know how Zencaster works now. It's pay to play, basically.
There's a limit now on the free. That's why we've got this problem with the time. There's a limit now.
There's a free form of Zencaster, but if you allow them to put ads, and I am very strictly against ads and marketing.
So you'll do that. You've already mentioned little bits that you'll clip out of episodes to make the flow work. And then, so where are we going?
Okay, so there's something funny I did recently. You know how I do those comedy bits if my recording gets screwed over.
Yep.
So there's a part where about 8 minutes of my guest's audio is totally blank. And you can just hear me asking him questions and just silence. So I made it that I'd ask a question or say something, and then an AI voice would say what I claim was what they said, but is actually a comedic bit. Like I'd ask them something and they'd say, "Oh, you're such an asshole," or something like that.
That's brilliant. That's
Yeah.
so creativity. I've mentioned that before, where you've done that when you did the conversation with Christine.
Yeah, her dog barked, and she was like, "What the heck's happening, man?" And then I put a poem, myself reciting a poem of her being mauled by a rougarou, which is a werewolf in Louisiana.
And that was gold to me. I loved that. So you've already touched on the logo, which was created by Christina, the crescent hair.
And I mean, for your listeners, like go listen to Marv's episode. Pods Like Us meets the Crescent Hair is a title like that. That's an amazing episode. It's almost 2 hours, but like I think it's one of your rare discussions where you're talking with somebody who has nothing to do with digital video or audio media or podcasting. She's just an artist of the weird.
Yeah. I made a conscious decision at a certain point where Pods Like Us is a title which can allow for all sorts of diversions, shall we say?
Exactly. Like what we did now.
Yeah. We've just turned into an episode of Therapy Bites, essentially.
And like I've been urging you to have me on for months, and you're like, okay, and nothing ever happens. And I'm like, Marv is probably intimidated of the idea of having me on again because something like this will happen.
But I'm open to these things happening because I think that's what makes it interesting and it allows me to get something out of it. Again, I'm being incredibly selfish.
Yes, as you should.
How dare I? How dare I?
And this is the best form of selfishness. It's not to be popular or to get ad revenue. Selfishness to learn something and to change as a person.
Yeah, to build ourselves and make us
Yeah.
to change who we are. Absolutely. So don't beat around the bush, Marv. Just say. So and then we're back to the boring and the mundane here. So the music for the show. Then go on.
Okay,
What's all that
so
about?
the intro music is from the same artist who did the Darwin's Deviations intro music. His name is Francisco Sanchez. He is from Spain. He puts his music up online for free. We chatted a bit. He's a very nice guy. He also loves the X-Files, just like me and you.
Yes,
But
absolutely. I love the X-Files.
did you notice the outro music for all my episodes, Marv? So the outro music
Yep.
is this wonderful melody that kind of gets you pondering about the cosmos, about nature, about your role in the universe. It's very relaxing. A lot of people love that ending music I put. And the point is, my opening music is, very sci-fi, scary, woo.
Yep.
But by the end, it's a more spiritual melody. And that's what I do with the paranormal on my show. I talk about things that are superficially scary, monsters and ghosts and aliens. And then I make it very nuanced, deep, philosophical, and spiritual in the end.
That's lovely. I'm lost for words after that one. But yeah.
I think it's very important for somebody who wants to do a very personal spiritual journey podcast, whatever
Yeah.
you're talking about, even if you're talking about cardboard boxes, to be mindful of what you're doing. Just the way I layer the music. First, it's scary music for the intro, and then it's spiritual for the outro, and that's where I'm going with my conversations. It's just a little dose of mindfulness that kind of enhances what you're doing, and people who hear it pick up on that because you don't hear very often that kind of mindfulness in most mainstream podcasts.
So I was about to look for that. There is a show all about people that talk about cardboard boxes and packaging. You wouldn't be surprised to know that. But if anyone's interested,
if they're enjoying it, then you are picking up on the spirit of the conversation. You don't care about the boxes. You care about the people who are talking about them.
And why are they interested? What is it about them and about boxers that is a part of them, and what makes it who they are?
Yes.
It's like the Get Flushed podcast, which is about somebody that talks about portable toilets.
That sounds like something I'd be into. Because I make a lot of fart and poop jokes for your listeners. Yes, I'm a very deep philosophical thinker, but I'm also not very academic about it. So I insert a lot of comedy and satire.
We've spoken before about this, and I've said to you that I think that comedy and satire is a very good way of teaching people and being educational.
Yes. And you're also kind of lifting up their defenses so you can stab them in the gut with the actual deep philosophical thing that you want to transfer to them.
Absolutely. So what advice would you give to people if they wanted to make their own podcast?
Apart from all the advice I already stated.
I know, absolutely. I think you've got it all in there already.
Yeah. I mean, it all depends on what you want from a podcast. And if you're listening right now to this, if you're somebody who's into mainstream marketable podcasts, I mean, you wouldn't be listening to me now. So you're obviously somebody who'd be interested in more a deep philosophical, spiritual, indie type of thing. So just do whatever you feel needs to be, but not necessarily what you want. If things don't go the way you want or plan, that's good. As long as you're feeling spiritually fulfilled by what you're creating. It does not need to be what you want, what you plan, and it does not need to be successful in any objective way if it is already successful to you and if you get something out of it.
Great. Yep. And you don't need hundreds and thousands of pounds worth of equipment to do it with either.
Oh, I have a shitty Chinese microphone because I'm in Bosnia and stuff is expensive here. And even the stuff we have is, cheap merchandise from overseas.
Well, going back to the show that you did previously, Darwin's Deviations, that was created on a telephone.
Yeah, exactly. I learned to edit, so I did all the recording on a phone, and then I sliced and diced. Essentially, what I was doing in Audacity is kind of like cartoon animation, but with audio.
Yep. You can do it no matter what equipment you've got. Just enjoy doing it.
Yes.
That's what you're doing it for.
Yes.
Enjoy it and make it that every time that you go there, it's not something that you don't want to do, or it's like, oh God, I'm making another podcast. It's got to be something that you want to do.
Oh man, so I constantly stumble upon indie podcasts that just started, who have no views or nothing, and I listen and I love hearing it, even though the audio is crap.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like I should be a mentor to these people. I've been through this for the past 3 years as an indie podcaster with shit equipment who doesn't know what he's doing. But if you have that something, that spark that I can feel through the shitty audio, something that intrigues me, something that tells me that you are enjoying what you're doing, I love to contact those people and tell them, just keep doing what you're doing.
I'm conscious of this Zencaster timer thing going on here, but I'm going to have to say this. It must be interesting, though, for you, where, speaking about that, it's almost like you're part of a community now, almost as though people rally around you. I mean, that might be a very uncomfortable way to put it, but there's all these podcasters and all these people that are involved in the arts and all these things who just seem to, they've made themselves friends essentially with you, and you have this community now around you.
So a big part of my podcasting, I'll keep it brief because this could be a whole episode, but myself and Todd, apart from our podcasts, kind of in the shadows behind the curtains, weave this whole community around us. Yeah. And we have gotten a lot of people to talk with each other and then go off and collaborate with each other and so on and so on. And that's the most beautiful part. I don't care as much about my podcast as much as I care about other people being inspired by the example that I put out there and then doing something of their own that can inspire me. So I can see reflections of what I'm doing in the creativity and work of other people who are influenced by what I'm putting out there.
That's great. So what podcast do you like to listen to?
Okay, man. So since we have not much time in Zencaster, obviously Create Magic, Todd Purse's show. Yep. You always post about it, so people probably know all about it. Campfire Tales of the Strange and Unsettling from Jordan Heath and Ryan.
Yeah,
you had Jordan on your show. Jordan and I have been friends for the past 2 years, talking about these things very intricately. And other podcasts, there is 6 Degrees of John Keel by Barbara Fisher. She is mostly focused on talking with experiencers of strange phenomena, and she is an experiencer herself. She had me on her show a year ago, which led to me having this wonderful manic period of creating this wonderful content, inspired by my conversation I had with her. And she has been, a collaborator with me, not on the podcast as much, but behind the scenes. And most recently, the Esoteric Book Club from my friend Jason. We
Yeah.
have been talking a lot and collaborating, and I see that we have inspired each other a lot and kind of reshaped our views on these topics.
I've got them on my feed. So where can people find you and get hold of you then, Vuk?
So you can find me anywhere except YouTube. I mean, people are listening to a podcast about podcasts, so they know where to find podcasts.
Yep.
But
true.
yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. I don't have Twitter anymore because I don't like Twitter. Especially, I don't like UFO Twitter. And I mean, that's it. I do have a Facebook, but I'm not active there as much.
Problem with Twitter is that there's too many twits there.
Yeah, and even with its renaming of X, even though I am an X-Files fan, I still am not interested.
Oh, God, that's a dreadful, dreadful change right there. It says everything about it.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you for speaking with me today, Vuk. We're going to carry on talking after this.
No problem.
But anyway, you can find pods like us. Well, you're listening to us, so you know where to find us. Also, we're available on Instagram. We're still on Twitter. I'm not going to call it X, although I've transferred to Threads as well. And you can contact us through podslikeus@gmail.com. I will push actually themarvzone.org if you want to go there for any more weird thoughts from my very strange and nerdy brain, shall we say. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.